So joining us now is criminal defense lawyer and former prosecutor, been on both sides, Vinoo Varghese. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So listen, before we get into, some of the testimony, yesterday Vlad and I were talking about the judge in this case. Turns out that you actually know him quite well.
I do.
So, how do you think he's handling this high-profile case?
I think Judge Brian Cogan, I don't think there could be any better judge to handle this kind of case than Judge Cogan. I did 2 trials in front of him, had another major federal hearing. He's the kind of guy who isn't beholden to the government. He was not a former federal prosecutor, as most federal judges are. He was actually a George W. Bush appointee, but he comes from a civil background. And the U.S. Attorney's, he's not super popular with the U.S. Attorney's Office there because he's compassionate. He's the compassionate conservative that Republicans once talked about. And he's known not to go along with things. And so he doesn't rubber stamp things, as a lot of federal judges do, because a lot of these guys go from being a career prosecutor into the bench and wearing a robe. And he's not like that. So there couldn't be any better person to handle this kind of case.
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about yesterday, which was curious, is that El Chapo's wife got into the courtroom with a phone. Yeah. And I just know what would happen to us if we, even in jury duty, we had a phone with us, then we would be in big trouble with the judge. And in this case, they took the phone away, but they let her continue sitting in. Right. What's your assessment of that?
I think Judge Cogan didn't think it was a big deal.
Okay.
I mean, look, these kind of things actually happen. Security, I think the security is more focused with guys with guns walking around patrolling the thing than it is with an individual, even though it happens to be her wife. I mean, she's a beauty queen. She can't be, she can't be away from her phone too long.
Oh, is that the case? Oh, okay.
Well, then she gets a pass.
Okay, so let us talk about this star witness, Miguel Martinez. Such high security for this guy. You couldn't even sketch him. They were so concerned about him being identified, but clearly people who are in the Sinaloa cartel must have known him and who he is. He testified about the wealth that El Chapo had sort of created. How does the jury take what he had to say into consideration?
I think they're going to be very much mesmerized by this kind of testimony. I mean, when you hear about a private zoo and that he had to take a train to get around his little fortune, Paul Manafort has his ostriches and pythons. El Chapo's got lions and tigers on his little range. So I think that's going to be that kind of stuff is going to be very difficult for the defense to overcome. El Chapo has very good lawyers, and Jeff Lichtman is one of them. And they're painting a picture of a corrupt Mexican government and that El Chapo is basically the fall guy for this. But when you hear stories like that about this kind of wealth and stuff, and also he has that reputation, it's going to be very difficult.
If you weren't running the cartel, how could you afford a private train and planes and zoo?
Except the flip side, of course, is that much of this testimony is dated. In other words, these guys haven't been around him for at least 10 years. So that does give the defense a little bit of breathing room. They could say, well, maybe he was that guy 10 years ago, but he's since cleaned up his act. I mean, it could be as simple as that.
Well, remember, he was in jail.
No, I know, but I'm just saying,
on the run.
If you're the jury, you're like, how do you know? Because that happened with your memory. There's a lot of ways. You've been a defense lawyer, you've been a prosecutor. There's a lot of good ways a defense attorney could.
Sure, and I think that the other things that they're going to talk about is trying to independently prove some of this stuff, right? And Judge Cogan is not going to let them to get into every nitty-gritty detail. So when the defense challenges and says, what do you have, that's it, basically. And so, if they seem more persuasive to the jury, that could sow the seeds of doubt ultimately. And, his opening statement was very much about how corrupt the Mexican government was, how there are corrupt American officials even, put out what you know about the government. And when you hear stories in the past about Secret Service agents, hooking up with prostitutes while across, you may have doubts. And there could be, you get one on the jury, that's enough.
All right, Vinoo Varghese, always great to have you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.